Welcome back to the channel. Today is Thursday, July 23rd. We are now 103 days away from the elections in November, a little less than 3.5 months away now. In this next video, what we're going to do here is, this is the 2016 presidential election results map. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through each state, as we always do west to east, and determine whether or not Joe Biden, the Democratic challenger to Donald Trump, will outperform Hillary Clinton and her results in these 50 states. Now, why are we doing it from Joe Biden's perspective? Well, the reality is he is the challenger, and so it is up to him to be on offense, whereas Donald Trump is on defense. And so it's less important for him to quote-unquote outperform, considering he is defending a number of states, and obviously the ones that here have the dashed lines are what basically gave Trump the election, along with a couple others. So let's get right into it. In the state of Hawaii, obviously Hillary Clinton was always going to get a pretty good number there, but as you see here, what's kind of interesting is that 62.2% of the vote is actually lower for one of, if not the most liberal state in the country, than some other major liberal bastions. Particularly some urban areas and some portions of other states, if not entire states, that vote for Democrats by a larger margin than that. And that is indicative, I think, of low turnout. And that is something that we saw from Hillary Clinton throughout the campaign, is that even the Democrats, some who ended up turning out and voting for her, but the majority of the party was just not that fired up about it. And I think there was some complacency, given that while Hillary Clinton had a very small lead in the polls on Election Day, there was just this general attitude of there's just no way that Donald Trump, with everything that has gone on up to the election to that point, again, it's not a political statement, as I make that disclaimer a lot in this channel, but it was just, again, a fact that he had a number of very, very unusual, let's put it, scandals and gaffes and things come up throughout his time that made him a worse candidate. But those factors may have contributed to Hillary's demise, and I think that Joe Biden is bound to outperform Hillary a little bit. Not that Donald Trump is going to necessarily get over 30%, as you see here, but I think that Joe Biden will get a higher number, especially also because there's not that major third-party name. I don't think there's anybody that's going to be getting 3.7% of the vote, which is not nothing for a third-party candidate. Gary Johnson actually did a pretty good job reaching that number. So I think Joe Biden will outperform Hillary in the state of Hawaii, just as I think he will in the state of Alaska. Hillary got 36.6% of the vote. Recent polling has Joe Biden within striking distance of Alaska. Now, does that mean I think he will win the state? Absolutely not. I give him basically a 0% chance to win the state, but I do give him a good chance to not lose by 15 points. To Donald Trump. As you can see, Alaska, as we know, has a sort of an independent streak to it. Lisa Murkowski infamously lost her Senate bid in the Republican primary, for crying out loud, and then just began running as an independent and promised to caucus with Republicans, and then she won. Of course, Al Gross, who's the quote-unquote Democratic candidate, is running as an independent. He has just promised to caucus, of course, with the Democrats. He is running against the incumbent Dan Sullivan, who recently ran into some trouble when he tweeted out a photo of Elijah Cummings when he was trying to tweet out a condolence photo and a tribute photo of John Lewis. So I also think that Joe Biden is going to outperform Hillary Clinton in this state as well. And I, again, don't think that Gary Johnson is going to, or anybody is going to get 6% of the vote as a third-party candidate. So I have Joe Biden winning these two, or not winning, but winning a bigger share of the vote in these two non-contiguous parts of the country. Now to the mainland. In the state of Washington, again, very interesting how Hillary Clinton only carried 52.5% of the vote here. And while, again, it wasn't close, that was only because Donald Trump got such a low percentage. And if we look in here, if we go into the state itself, you can see how obviously, like anything else, some of the major urban areas went blue. Of course, Seattle is basically the biggest portion of why this state continues to vote blue, and Hillary carried that by the amount that she needed to, along with Olympia. But again, you see here only 51.3%. Vancouver, 44.5%. And then Spokane went to Donald Trump, Yakima went to Donald Trump, Bellingham up here went to Hillary. But as you can see, other than Seattle, in these neighboring counties, which are normally very, very blue, up here in Snohomish, I believe is how you pronounce it, county, and in Skagit County, Jefferson County, Kitsap County, you can see how Hillary Clinton with the exception of Jefferson, got a portion of the vote that was not necessarily indicative of a wipeout in the state of Washington. And so, again, bad turnout, voters voting for a third party candidate, and for a lot of people, I think, just staying home. That's why Donald Trump only carried 36.8%, but Hillary still didn't manage to get near that 60% threshold. So I also expect Joe Biden to outperform her in this state. Now let's go down here to Oregon. We'll zoom back out here. 50.1% to 39.1%. Exactly the same thing here in play, because as you see, Hillary barely cleared the 1 million mark, 1,002,106, good for 50.1%. And again, this is the same kind of thing where this is indicative of Portland showing up to vote in droves, as you would expect it to do, given what we're seeing happen there a little less than 4 months ago until the election. But Salem, which is a county, Marion County, that typically does vote Democratic by a very small margin. It's kind of similar to Fresno in California. It actually voted for Donald Trump by about 6,000 votes. And so this is another state. I expect Joe Biden to not win by barely a majority, and instead not even come close to winning by a plurality, but probably win 56, 57% of the vote. Also considering the fact that Jeff Merkley, one of the state's 2 senators and a very popular Democratic senator, is up for re-election, which I think is going to help boost turnout for Joe Biden. Now, the biggest state in the United States and the biggest electoral prize is California, and it's 55 electoral votes. Now, as you can see here, Hillary Clinton did what she needed to do. She won by over 4 million votes here in California, and this was a good sign for the Democratic Party, because as demographic shifts continue to take place across the country, particularly in the Sun Belt, what we're seeing is the Democrats are potentially losing some voters up here in the Rust Belt area and in general just in the northern portion of the country, not necessarily the Northeast, but just kind of in this area up here. Whereas in California, that's just not happening. And we're seeing how Texas is becoming less and less Republican, whereas California is not becoming less and less Democratic. The Democrats flipped a bunch of House seats here. This was a big portion of their 40 House gains. Now, the Republicans managed to flip one back when they defeated Katie Hill in a special election. That was a boost for them. But as you can see here, turnout was very good. They got the margins what they needed. San Francisco, look at that margin. That's larger than the margins that Nancy Pelosi wins in that district. Sacramento was not close. San Jose was a complete wipeout. Even Fresno, that's a bigger margin than Democrats usually win. Of course, Los Angeles, look at that margin there. Neighboring counties of Ventura County, and then down here in San Diego County. And so even out here in some portions of the state that typically vote red, even San Bernardino County, which sometimes in gubernatorial races will vote red, went for Hillary Clinton by over 10 points. So I would expect Joe Biden to get around the same percentage of the vote here, 61.5%, and more good signs for the Democrats, given that a very unpopular, unliked candidate like Hillary Clinton did not sway any voting turnout and any voting preference out here in California. Now in Idaho, Donald Trump, as you see here, 59.2% of the vote. Evan McMullin, amazingly, captured almost 7% of the vote, and that's really something considering he was expected to carry a little bit of the third-party vote, but only from his state of Utah here. But he managed to do it here as well, 6.7% of the vote. And so as a result, I would expect voters of Evan McMullin to actually vote for Joe Biden, because I think that people voting for Evan McMullin had some disdain for Donald Trump as opposed to disdain for Hillary Clinton. And now, while all 46,476 may not turn out this time, you can expect them to do just a little bit better. Furthermore, Boise, Idaho is growing more and more every year. And it's not necessarily one of the fastest growing cities in the country, but it is growing. It now elects a Democratic mayor, and there is some chatter that within the next couple election cycles, and again in the House, it's only every 2 years, that the Democrats might have a little bit of a chance to get a House member elected here. So Joe Biden might. There's no outperform Hillary. There's no real reason to read into that too much. But because of the vote share Evan McMullin got, I would expect him to do better. In the state of Utah, kind of a similar scenario. Okay, Evan McMullin got 1 out of every 5 votes here. Okay, he got over 240,000 votes in the state of Utah. Donald Trump won this state with a plurality of the vote, and it wasn't that close. He only got to 45.1%, whereas Hillary Clinton carried just 27%. So again, same thing at work here. McMullin isn't running, Gary Johnson isn't running, Jill Stein isn't running, hell, even Kanye West is no longer running. So Joe Biden will probably peel off some of these votes from Evan McMullin. Furthermore, Mitt Romney's presence in the state of Utah has given Democrats a little bit of a boost here just because he's been an outspoken critic of Donald Trump, voted to convict him on impeachment. A Democrat actually won a House race in this area, defeating Mia Love in 2018. That was a big pickup for them in the House. So again, as we're seeing out here in the western portion of the country, I expect Joe Biden to outperform these numbers. Exact same thing here in Arizona. And if anything, I mean, this is the first state that we've gotten to so far that you should expect to more or less flip, because as you see here again, this state was closer than expected in 2016. Again, this is back when John McCain was still alive, and so I think there were some people here who were lifelong fans of his, John McCain that is, who did not take the president's comments about him not being a war hero lightly. And as you see, Trump also, again, won with a plurality of the vote, with Gary Johnson capturing 4% of the vote, which was about the difference here between Trump and Hillary. Maricopa County, the fastest growing county in the United States, continuously is shifting more and more to the Democrats, as this is the first major part of the Sun Belt that the Democrats are seeing results in. Kyrsten Sinema, of course, won her Senate race here in 2018, and that was a big part of the reason why Democrats feel they have a chance to win here in the state of Arizona, because the other Senate race is also up. Martha McSally, a deeply unpopular candidate, is being challenged viciously by Mark Kelly, the former astronaut and husband of Gabrielle Giffords, and he is widely expected to win that Senate race out here in Arizona. So Joe Biden will absolutely outperform 44.6. If he loses, which I do not expect him to lose in Arizona, he will get around 49% of the vote. So Joe Biden will probably outperform these numbers, and this was already a pretty decent showing by Hillary to get 44.6 in the state of Arizona. But you can expect Joe Biden to at least get to 49 and will probably win this race in the state of Arizona, giving him a crucial 11 electoral votes that Hillary did not have. Now, I realize here that we skipped Nevada pretty much here. Now, interestingly enough, Nevada was a state that Donald Trump was actually expected to, was ahead on election day in the polls by 1 point. But as we've discussed in this channel, and it's well known by now, Nevada is one of those states that always overestimates Republicans in their polls. But with that said, the Democrats usually, this is sort of a misnomer as like a deep blue state. This was one of the 7 states that the Democrats were able to flip the governorship in. They also picked up a Senate seat here. Jackie Rosen defeated Dean Heller, and Steve Sisolak was able to win his governorship race. So the Democrats got a lot of good results here, and they also have Catherine Cortez Masto, who is continuing to build up a bigger national following, as she is put in bigger leadership positions. But with that said, Nevada is kind of, even with a Democratic governor, 2 Democratic senators now, the whole thing, the reality of the situation is, I think, given the pandemic and just given the fact that, I don't expect Joe Biden to necessarily carry this by a plurality the way Hillary did, but I think it could be around the same margin, like 52-48, maybe 51-48, just depending on how many people vote for Howie Hawkins or Joe Jorgensen. The reality is, this is still a state with a pretty big Republican presence. As you can see here, Las Vegas doesn't vote for Democrats by that big a margin, even with the big union presence. Same with Reno. Reno barely votes Democratic altogether. So with that in mind, I would expect Biden to still carry Nevada, but not by that big a margin. Now let's get to the next little quadrant here in the state of Montana. Interestingly enough, this is a state that, as we know, it is a deep red state, obviously on the presidential levels, but it's a very strange state and a very fascinating state in that on the state level, the state of Montana can vote for Democrats and vote for Democrats quite often. In fact, I think it's the last 3 governors, is that right? Or at least the last 2 governors of the state of Montana have been Democrats. And one of them is one of the most popular governors in the country, and that is Democrat Steve Bullock. Steve Bullock was the only politician to win his statewide race in a state that Donald Trump won on that night in 2016, which is quite a statement. And he won pretty comfortably. So that means a lot of Trump voters voted for Steve Bullock. So we're looking it up now. They're back-to-back Democratic governors. Brian Schweitzer was the previous governor before Steve Bullock took over. And so, Barack Obama, of course, came pretty close to actually winning the state back in 2008. And now Steve Bullock is running for the Senate. And he's running for Senate against the incumbent Steve Daines. And, because it still aligns generally as a very red state, the reality of the situation is, Steve Bullock was probably the only Democrat, short of Max Baucus coming back from retirement, to have a chance to win this state here. And of course, the other senator is Jon Tester, the Democrat, who won his reelection bid by about 4 points in 2018. And so with all of that in mind, with Steve Bullock boosting some turnout, I absolutely expect Joe Biden to get more than 35.4% of the vote. I expect him to clear 40%. He might not get that far past 40%, but 42, 43% is probably what you can expect Joe Biden to get in the state of Montana. Wyoming, I know it's kind of a running joke at this point because there's just never anything to discuss here. I don't expect Joe Biden to do any better here. Wyoming remains one of the most stagnant states in the country. There's no shift being seen here. In fact, Hillary Clinton won just one single county here, as you can see. So I don't expect her or Joe Biden to have any positive results here. In the state of Colorado. Now, Hillary Clinton won this state by about 5 points. John Hickenlooper, the very popular former governor, ran for president for a short time, as did one of the senators, Michael Bennet. Both politicians' campaigns were very short-lived. Hillary only won the state again by a plurality. And as you see, Denver, which is a very, very big liberal area, carried her all the way basically to the finish line, along with Fort Collins. And so again, the thing is, Colorado is it kind of used to be a quote unquote swing state. It's not really a swing state anymore. It's pretty much a blue state. Win for Obama both times, win for Hillary. John Hickenlooper is widely expected to defeat Republican incumbent Cory Gardner. Again, as you can check out in my Senate election prediction videos, Colorado is one of the main Senate pickup opportunities for the Democrats. There's being Arizona, Montana, Iowa, North Carolina, and Maine, and potentially Kansas and potentially Georgia. So I think Joe Biden will probably again get this over the finish line in terms of not winning by a plurality, because as you see here, again, Gary Johnson won with carried over 5% of the vote. New Mexico, 48.3%. Again, look at that number for Gary Johnson. Again, this was, of course, where he used to be the governor of, and capturing almost 10% of the vote is quite a number. So that's not going to happen this time. New Mexico continues to shift further and further to the left as demographic changes continue to happen across the Sun Belt, and that's only going to favor Joe Biden. So he's going to outperform Hillary Clinton in both Colorado and New Mexico. Now in the state of North Dakota, Hillary Clinton, look at that, only 27% of the vote. Now, Heidi Heitkamp lost, and she lost by about 11 points, but she did carry 44% of the vote, which is at least a respectable number. And Kent Conrad, was a former long-term senator from the state of North Dakota himself. So while, the reality is, even though Joe Biden's not going to come close, he's probably going to get more than 27%. And again, even amongst Republicans, Joe Biden is a relatively liked figure. And so I would expect him to get 33, 34%, just a slightly more respectable number than 27, where you're just deep, deep, deep down, where you're getting basically tripled up in this race. South Dakota is a state that the Democrats have been a little bit underrated in. This is the South Dakota State Democratic Party is known as one of the best in the country. They do incredible work. They in recent years, I can't remember his name, but they had his or her name, but in the last 15 or so years, the Democrats had a senator from the state of South Dakota, and Kristi Noem, when she ran for governor, had a little bit of trouble in that race. Her opponent captured about 47% of the vote. Now, that doesn't mean that Joe Biden's necessarily going to do better than Hillary Clinton did here with 31.7%, but I think it'll probably be around the same, maybe a couple points higher, as again, Gary Johnson eclipsed that 5% mark. Nebraska is a very, very safe Republican state. There's not much to discuss here. Ben Sasse, his popularity has declined because he's been somewhat outspoken against Trumpism and what he believes that stands for and things of that nature. But 33.7% is about what I expect Joe Biden to get. Now in the state of Kansas, this is an interesting state here because as you can see, you click on this and you see, well, how in the world did Hillary Clinton even get 35.7? This map makes it look like she carried about 10 total votes. Well, here, you can see how the population centers are big. Whereas if you just come out here, look at these numbers. I mean, these are infinite. These are impossibly small numbers that we're seeing here. Some less than 1,000 votes. Look at that. Barely over 500. Gary Johnson, 19 votes. So clearly, I mean, the population of this state is very, very low. And of course, Laura Kelly, the Democrat, defeated Chris Kobach for governor in 2018, which was a very surprising development. She also won by about 5 percentage points. Now, Chris Kobach, of course, is running for the Senate, and he's giving the Republican Party a lot of headaches for that because if he is the Republican nominee, and we will know that a week from Tuesday, then Barbara Bollier, the former Republican, might have a chance to actually beat him. So with that in mind, with a potential big Senate race up for grabs, and with Chris Kobach, a man who's extremely unpopular among independents and extremely unpopular amongst even Republicans, I would expect Joe Biden to outperform Hillary and get close to 40%, which could be a little bit of a warning sign because while 40% isn't too big a deal for the opposite party, the reality is if it happens that quickly where you lose the governorship, you may lose a Senate race, and suddenly the presidential race tightens up by more than 5 points. That's going to sound the alarm for the Republicans. Oklahoma has not shown any good signs for the Democrats. They did have that House win, but as you can see here, every single county voted for Donald Trump. Even Oklahoma County, basically one of the only two urban areas. Tulsa, look at those margins. Even for urban areas, this one went for Donald Trump by such a resounding margin, just 29% of the vote for Hillary. Joe Biden might do a little better, but only because of President Trump's deep unpopularity, and again, no third-party candidate getting anywhere near 83,000 votes. Okay, now this is obviously a big one here. The state of Texas. Hillary Clinton got 43.2% of the vote, but you see how Donald Trump only carried 52.2%. Gary Johnson got over 280,000 votes here. So if you click on this state here and you examine this, first area I want to talk about is Dallas County. Hillary Clinton took 60.8% of the vote. That's a good number for a Democrat in any area really in Texas, even if it's a big urban area. The reality is Fort Worth, neighboring nearby, you can see how Donald Trump carried that by a much bigger margin in Tarrant County. But Beto O'Rourke in 2018 actually carried Tarrant County. Just as he obviously did way out here in El Paso, very liberal area, San Antonio, Austin. Houston is basically why the Republican Party continues to win in the state of Texas, because even though it votes blue usually in Harris County, it just doesn't vote by nearly a blue enough margin for the Democrats to really get this thing over the top, combined with these Hispanic counties down here. So, recent polls, though, showed Donald Trump basically tied with Joe Biden in the state of Texas. And there was that one poll that came out last week that had Biden up by 5 points in the state of Texas, which is really, really something. So you can expect Joe Biden to absolutely outperform Hillary Clinton's 43.2%. I still think Donald Trump is going to edge out Joe Biden when all is said and done. But I think Biden, assuming he loses, which is not a guarantee, I expect him to get at least 47% and probably even outperform Beto O'Rourke's 48.3%. I think it's very possible that Joe Biden could reach 48.5%, if not 49%. Okay, so think of Texas basically as the new Georgia, a state where Democrats do very well, get pretty good numbers, but can never quite get it over the finish line. So that's what's going to happen in Texas. But again, Texas is rapidly shifting leftward, and the Republicans are facing some trouble down here. So Joe Biden will absolutely outperform these numbers, just as he absolutely will in the state of Minnesota. You see how close that is? 1.5 points. That's it for a state that generally votes pretty blue. And as you can see, look at these margins. Okay, I mean, that's what, I'm not too good at math, but what is that, 44,000 votes? That's it. I mean, Trump came pretty close here. And if it weren't for um, the the protests that we're seeing come out of this after the events surrounding George Floyd, this state might still be in play. Now, of course, the Democrats had a field day, the 2018 midterms in the state of Minnesota, when they carried. There were three statewide races. The Democrats won all of them. Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar, and Tim Walz all won their races. None of them were close. So, with that in mind, not only is Joe Biden going to win by more than 1.5 points, he's also going to carry this by not by a plurality either. He's going to win with the majority of the vote. I would expect Joe Biden to win the state of Minnesota by 10 percentage points, 55 to 45. Now, in Iowa, a state that went for Barack Obama two different times, Donald Trump won by 10 points. 10 points. Okay, look at that. Very few counties voted blue. Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Davenport. But the Sioux City, that which went for Obama, that went to Donald Trump, and it wasn't that close. So I don't expect Joe Biden to carry Iowa because we haven't seen any reason to believe that. But Teresa Greenfield is a young upstart Democratic candidate who is leading Joni Ernst, the incumbent Republican, right now in the Senate race. So that, combined with, again, a deeply unpopular president, is probably going to push Joe Biden and narrow this up some. The governor race between Kim Reynolds and Fred Hubbell also tightened up to about a 53 to 47 margin in favor of Kim Reynolds, the Republican. So I would expect Joe Biden to grab around 45% of the vote compared to 41.7. And here we are. We've kind of however many states we've gone through now. And you can see there's obviously a trend developing here, and it's favoring Joe Biden. State of Missouri, 37.9%. I also expect this to trend a little bit better for Joe Biden. Does that mean he's going to win? No. But remember, Barack Obama came close here in 2008. Didn't come very close in 2012. Claire McCaskill, the Democratic senator here from Missouri, lost. As you can see, a huge portion of the Democratic presence in the state of Missouri comes out of St. Louis at 78.7%. In fact, there have been some studies that have suggested that if all of Kansas City was in the state of Missouri and not half of it was in the state of Kansas, and if basically all of St. Louis was not in Illinois, as we know there is a city of Illinois literally called East St. Louis, the hometown of Miles Davis, just by the way. If both of these urban areas just had their entire population within the state of Missouri, this would probably be a blue state, which is really something because, as you can tell, this is kind of similar to Kansas. Again, look at these numbers. Very, very small. This is a big one here in Springfield, but all in all, again, very unpopular president. There was a poll not that long ago that had Biden up by 2 points in Missouri. I'd expect Biden to get over 40%, but probably not very high above it, probably around 41% of the vote. So even though Donald Trump's number might go up from 56% to around 58%, I think Biden will clear the 40% threshold. The Democrats have shown have just absolutely collapsed in the state of Arkansas. Again, in 2008, when they had that gigantic Senate margin, it was like 58 to 42 or something like that. They had a senator, of course, from they had senators everywhere. They had a senator from Arkansas, a senator from Indiana, a senator from South Dakota, North Dakota, states that you don't consider, Louisiana, states that you don't consider blue in any way, shape, or form. And in Arkansas, I don't even expect. In fact, I expect Joe Biden to underperform from 33.7%. I just don't really see him getting 1 out of every 3 votes in the state, so I have this going for Donald Trump by about the same margin. Louisiana, kind of the same thing, okay, 38.4%. That's not a terrible number, for a very reliable red state. Of course, the state does have a Democratic governor, but he's kind of a Joe Manchin type, very conservative Democrat, so I don't expect Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden to have any kind of better performance in this state. Okay, so now we're going to come down here to the rest of the Sun Belt. In the state of Mississippi, absolutely, I expect Joe Biden to do better than 40.1%. This is the biggest by percentage, other than Washington, D.C., but the biggest state minority is the state with the largest minority population in the country, largest African American population in the United States. Is in the state of Mississippi. And As a result, we know it's, again, not a political statement. We know that the African American community is very turned up right now. They're very charged up. They're very fired up to come out and vote against Donald Trump. They're not happy with him. And that's going to push I keep mixing them up, Joe Biden further along from 40.1%. In fact, I would expect him to lose by only about a lean margin. So I would expect him to lose, with about 46% of the vote. Also because Mike Espy, meanwhile, a black Senate candidate, is running again against Cindy Hyde-Smith. And that minority influence, I think, will also push Joe Biden a little bit further. In Alabama, 34.4%, kind of a similar thing at work here. Doug Jones is probably going to lose to Tommy Tuberville. I do think Biden will do better than 34.4%, but not necessarily because he himself achieved anything in particular, just because this is such a low number, even for Alabama. Democrats can usually do better than 34.4%. They're, again, a big African-American population. Joe Biden can do a little bit better than that, but not necessarily because he's having a particularly good night on Election Day, but just because Hillary Clinton performed that poorly. All right, big one here, state of Florida. There's obviously not that much room for Joe Biden to do better than this, okay? Hillary Clinton got 47.4% of the vote, over 4.5 million votes. And as you see, she carried all the areas that you normally expect a Democrat to, except, ding, 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 down here up here in Duval County, where Donald Trump won by about 6,000 votes. This is a very white area of the United States, the whitest area by far in the state of Florida. And so as a result, if the Democrats don't carry Duval County even by a small margin, they're generally going to lose. And Hillary Clinton lost by 1.2 points. She lost by about 113,000 votes. Now, it's tough to tell exactly where this state stands because on the one hand, Joe Biden is trouncing Donald Trump in the polls down here. But on the other hand, in the 2018 midterms, the Republicans did extremely well. Ron DeSantis defeated Andrew Gillum in the gubernatorial race, and Rick Scott defeated longtime Democratic incumbent Bill Nelson in the Senate. So there were two statewide races, and the Republicans won both of them. That was a big disappointment for the Democrats. And remember, they had a lot of momentum, not only because this was a state that they've both parties obviously aggressively target in every election, but it was also the scene of the Parkland school shooting down here in Broward County. And we expected the Democrats to blow the margins away in that, county and down here in Miami and in Palm Beach. And they more or less did, but it just wasn't enough in the rest of the state in 2016 or in 2018 after that school shooting. So 47.4% of the vote, Gary Johnson only carried 2.2% of the vote. So this plurality that Donald Trump won by is not going to be made up for the Biden campaign by the absence of Gary Johnson or Jill Stein. Now, maybe a little bit of that will help. 200,000 suddenly freed up votes will probably help Joe Biden a little bit more than Donald Trump. But the reality is, I don't expect Joe Biden to... he probably will get better than 47.4%, but the reality is I think he will, if he wins the state, it will also be by just a plurality. So he'll probably outperform this number, but it may not be enough to actually carry the state. All right, now in the state of Georgia, 45.3% for Hillary Clinton. As I mentioned earlier, I compared this state to Texas as a state that the Democrats have a very good presence in and have a chance to win, it seems like, every election, but can't ever seem to get all the way over the hump. As you can see here, Hillary Clinton won with 45.3% of the vote, which is a pretty good number considering she wasn't that, attractive and popular within the African American community the way Joe Biden is, and in a state that also has a big minority population. But as you can see, she blew out the margins here in Fulton County. DeKalb County, an extremely liberal area of the country, went for her by over 200,000 or almost 200,000 votes. Now, I expect because Joe Biden's is just barely ahead in the polls in Georgia right now, I expect him to also outperform this number of 45.3, but not by as much as most people are expecting him to. And the reason for that is Georgia is notorious for not necessarily having their act together on election night, just from a tabulation standpoint, from having everything under control. So I don't necessarily expect this to trend any better for them in that direction. I would expect Joe Biden to grab around 47, 48%, but not get to the whole 49.5 as some people are expecting him to. All right, in the state of South Carolina, 40.7% for Hillary Clinton. Yeah, Joe Biden might do a little better than that, but only by like 1 or 2 points. The idea that people have of South Carolina as sort of this, potential bellwether state that could flip one way or the other is just kind of a myth. There was some signs of that in the gubernatorial election, most recent one when Henry McMaster had a tough race on his hands. He won at 54-46. But I think part of it is because of Jim Clyburn, his presence out here in South Carolina. The reality is Lindsey Graham is going to wallop Jamie Harrison, no matter what a big, stout, um, upstart candidate he is, despite all the fundraising records, everything. Like Jamie Harrison is not going to win, and it's not going to be close. Okay, a good result for Jamie Harrison would be losing by 10 points. So I think Biden might do just slightly better, but only by like 1 or 2 points. So Trump is going to be just fine here in South Carolina. Now, in North Carolina, this is another big one here. 49.8% was the result for Joe Biden, or for Donald Trump. Of course, Barack Obama carried the state of North Carolina the first time by a very slim margin. I believe it was something like 15,000 votes in 2008. He lost it. It was one of two states that he lost in 2012 to Mitt Romney, the other being Indiana. 46.2% is a pretty good number. This is kind of a similar thing to Georgia, given that another state, North Carolina being another state with a high minority population. And despite Hillary Clinton's unpopularity with that community, she still carried a large percentage of that vote. So I think because Cal Cunningham is on the ballot, but more importantly, Roy Cooper, the governor, a very, very popular Democratic governor, one of the most popular governors in the entire country of either party, is also on the ballot. And there are also 2 House districts in the southern portion of the state that are expected to flip from red to blue. And as a result, all those factors, the House districts, Cal Cunningham, and Roy Cooper being on the ballot, combined with a deeply unpopular president, as we know, and Joe Biden's popularity with the black community, have me saying that not only will Joe Biden outperform that number, but I think he's actually going to carry the state of North Carolina. And if he doesn't, he'll probably get to that number that Donald Trump got to, which is he'll probably lose by 50.2 to 49.8. So he's absolutely going to outperform that number, and by a couple points as well. Okay, now here in Tennessee, before we forget, 34.7% for Hillary Clinton. I don't expect Joe Biden to do that much better than that, honestly, because Tennessee has continued to shift to the right over the years. Phil Bredesen, who's about as electable a Democrat as you will ever find in the state of Tennessee, didn't even come close to defeating Marsha Blackburn, who was, very unapologetically on the Trump side of many issues. So Joe Biden's not going to do much better than that number. If he does, it'll be by a few thousand votes. In the state of Kentucky, Hillary Clinton, 32.7%. I think what we are seeing in this state is a little bit of a sort of a reckoning, if you will. I know that sounds a little bit dramatic, but Mitch McConnell is facing, even though he's going to be just fine, he is facing a relatively strong challenge from Amy McGrath, who was personally recruited by Chuck Schumer to challenge him. There was one poll not that long ago that had Amy McGrath up by 1 point. That same poll also mentioned that when voters participating in that poll were made aware of the fact that Amy McGrath supports term limits, her support amongst those who participated in that poll grew. So even though there was one poll either today or yesterday, I can't remember, that had McConnell up by like 21 points or something, I think that race will be a little closer than people think, but it's kind of similar to the South Carolina one. It's not actually going to go anywhere. So Joe Biden might do a little better. He'll probably get to 35%, but it's not really anything to write home about. West Virginia, one of the other states that Donald Trump carried every county in. West Virginia is now one of the most Republican states in the entire country, if not the most Republican, even though it does have Joe Manchin, a Democrat, as one of the senators. But Joe Manchin is, in fact, more conservative than some Republicans even are. So, that shouldn't, give the Democrats any real enthusiasm or optimism there, other than the fact that they can get a senator elected here. And of course, they had Jim Justice, a governor, who before he switched parties. So he's not going to outperform Hillary Clinton there. Now in Virginia, 49.8%. You can expect Joe Biden to win with a majority of the vote here. 3% went to Gary Johnson. This was a state that had relatively low turnout. I think people in suburban Washington, D.C. are going to turn out in numbers like we've never seen before in this election. And as a result, that's going to push Joe Biden well across this threshold. Again, this was a state, we remember on election night, this was a state that Nate Silver of 538 pointed out how long it took for AP to call the state of Virginia. It was deep into the night. And the reality is there was few hours there where it looked like Donald Trump might have a chance to win, which was so bizarre considering Virginia's become a solid Democratic state over the last 15 years. And of course, she was running with Tim Kaine as her running mate, who's a very popular senator from the state of Virginia, for crying out loud. So Biden will not only win Virginia, he'll get it with over 50% of the vote. Pardon me, let me get some sustenance here. It's a lot of talking. That's good. All right, now in Maryland. 60.3%. That's a pretty good number for Hillary Clinton, considering this is a state still with a Republican governor, a very moderate Republican governor. Joe Biden will probably get around the same number because I don't think there's any real... He probably hasn't spent any money in the state of Maryland. He certainly doesn't need to. So he'll probably get around that same number. In Delaware, of course, his former home state, he'll definitely do better than this. Okay, 41.7% is kind of a surprising number for Donald Trump, especially when he carried, the area that Dover is in. So you can expect Joe Biden to certainly do better than that. I think Joe Biden is going to clear 60% in the state of Delaware. Of course, he sort of has two home states, the other being Pennsylvania. But yeah, so you can expect him to do better than that. I'm clicking on rather in Delaware. Okay, let's come back over here to Wisconsin. All right, so this was one of the Rust Belt states that Donald Trump managed to carry. This was a shocker. There's a lot of noise. There's been a lot of noise over the last 4 years about how quote-unquote wrong the polls were. They really weren't that wrong. Okay, Wisconsin was really the only state that there was just this big, what factor where, Hillary Clinton led by about 6 points on election day, and then Donald Trump ripped it away, winning by less than a point, but still winning. So, that suggests, pretty much that it's the kind of thing where Joe Biden is again performing very, very well in polling. However, the reality of the situation is, do people trust that? Do people trust, the idea that these polls could once again be wrong? But again, as you see here, 47.2% was the final number for Donald Trump. And that's just not good enough. That's just not going to cut it for a guy that, is now facing a better candidate where there's not a major third-party vote happening. And so that, tells you all you need to know. So yeah, I absolutely expect Joe Biden to do better than Hillary Clinton did, capturing 47.2. I absolutely do. I think that, it's very possible that Biden will carry around... If he doesn't win it altogether, he could win with a plurality just because, we do expect with the pandemic turnout to be rather low. But let's not forget that Tony Evers won his gubernatorial race, as did Tammy Baldwin win her race for the Senate. So the Democrats picked up 2 statewide races. They also won the Supreme Court race here. So they basically went 3 for 3 across the board. And so I expect Joe Biden to outperform this number as well, just as he will in Michigan. Okay, 47.3%. Look how close that is. That's less than 11,000 votes. I mean, Joe Biden, it continues to do very well in the state of Michigan. This was another state that also had 2 statewide elections that went for the Democratic Party. One went to Debbie Stabenow. The other went to Gretchen Whitmer, easily defeating Bill Schuette, the Republican governor. And so those factors gave Democrats more and more hope in the state that they will defeat Donald Trump at the ballot box that time around. So yes, in these two, I expect Joe Biden to outperform just as he will in Ohio. Okay, 43% went to Hillary Clinton, 51% to Donald Trump. Ohio is one of those states where the unionized presence is beginning to decrease just a little bit, little by little, but that doesn't mean that the Democrats are, out of luck here. It just means that they have themselves, a steeper hill to climb this time around. And so I think that they'll be fine, in terms of, I don't think this is a lost cause for them, even though I do think Donald Trump, I should say, will be fine Joe Biden's going to do better than 43%. He just will. Okay, basically in every state that Hillary Clinton lost, especially the swing states, it's just got to be reiterated. She's just not a very liked politician. And, we saw that in Ohio. We saw that in Wisconsin. We saw it in Michigan. We certainly saw it in Pennsylvania. And, we saw it in states that have a lot of independents, like Iowa, like New Hampshire. The reality of the situation is, she's just not that well liked. And I think that you're going to see this time around Joe Biden, while he may not ultimately carry it, even though he's ahead in the polling right now, he's probably going to do better than 43.2%. Illinois, by the way, we forgot these two, is 51.1%, same thing. Or rather 55.2%, same thing. Dick Durbin also being up for election. J.B. Pritzker won his gubernatorial race, one of the 7 seats the Democrats managed to flip, along with, as we mentioned earlier, New Mexico, Kansas, Maine, Michigan, Wisconsin. There's one other in there somewhere I'm forgetting. But, I expect Joe Biden to again do just fine in the state of Illinois. Now in the state of Indiana, 37.5%. Nothing to discuss here. Mike Pence is going to push Donald Trump over the top here. I don't think, the Democrats are really going to be spending any money here anyway. All right, so this is sort of the last big state that we need to discuss here. Pennsylvania, 48.2%. Again, another state that Donald Trump won by a plurality. Are you getting a sense of what's happening here? Basically, all the states that Joe Biden is trying to flip that Donald Trump won in 2016, he won by a plurality. He did it in Arizona. He did it in Florida. He did it in Ohio. Well, no, not in Ohio, but he barely got over the majority point. Won it by a plurality in Pennsylvania. It wasn't even close to a majority in Michigan, and the same in Wisconsin. Now in Texas, again, not that far over the finish line. Iowa, not that far. Even in Utah, look at that. That's a plurality in one of the reddest states in the country. Okay, so Georgia, another state, he barely got over 50%. So you're seeing how, same in North Carolina, another state he won by a plurality. So you're seeing how, the third party candidate combined with the low turnout is what doomed Hillary Clinton for the most part. So, here is Pennsylvania, one of Joe Biden's kind of 2 home states. And this is, of course, the quote unquote Scranton Joe thing. So, you know what? Pennsylvania is a state I expect to go to Joe Biden. Even though I've basically said that about most of the states here, this is just where we are with about 100 days to go, where the polling says this race stands. And as a result, I have this going to Joe Biden, and not by a plurality either. New Jersey, 55%, same kind of thing. Probably some better turnout, probably will favor the Democratic Party a little bit more in the state of New Jersey after Phil Murphy flipped this gubernatorial race back to the Democrats. New York, 59%. You can bet that Joe Biden will clear 60%. Absolutely he will. Turnout's going to be huge. People in liberal areas like Manhattan and Buffalo and, Brooklyn, all those other areas of New York are very, very fired up. And they're going to vote blue. There's no doubt about it. Connecticut, another state, kind of the similar thing. Joe Biden is going to do better than 54.6% up here in the Northeast. It's just that simple. 54.4, are you kidding me? In Rhode Island, same exact thing as Connecticut. These numbers are not going to be the same. Massachusetts, 60%, probably around the same. I think that there's going to be some turnout numbers here that are relatively similar, just because you're probably going to get some voters that aren't as excited about voting for Joe Biden as they may have been about voting for Elizabeth Warren, but it's just that way. Vermont, 56.7%. Yeah, same thing. Neither party's probably spending any money here. Of course, this is one of those states in this area of the country that has a Republican governor, actually. Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maryland all have Republican governors, believe it or not. Now, in New Hampshire, we should also discuss this one. Look at that. This was the tightest race in the entire election last time. Hillary Clinton won it by 0.3 of a point, 348,000 to 345,000. That's not going to happen. Okay, Jeanne Shaheen is also up for election. She's probably going to win that race, and that would suggest that. That would suggest that Jeanne Shaheen has, quite a lot of popularity, despite this being a state that, most Senate candidates of either party don't really get that much traction in. And so, all told, I expect Joe Biden to, again, outperform this number and get over the 50% mark and win. So just as Donald Trump needs to, this is a state that he's going to have to win, without a plurality, and I fully expect him to do just that. Okay, and finally, I thank you guys for sticking out with me on this. I know this has been a long one, but here we are at last in the state of Maine. Okay, 47.8%, another plurality state. You can tell how low the turnout was in this election based on the amount of states that went for one party or the other based with a plurality. And that's what's going to happen here. 47.8%. Susan Collins is facing by far the toughest test of her career when she is the underdog for the first time in decades against Sarah Gideon, the female Speaker of the Maine Senate, or of the House, I beg your pardon. So that will do it. That's all 50 states for you. As you can see, there's obviously a big trend towards Joe Biden across these 50 states. And as a result, I expect him to not only do a lot better than Hillary Clinton did, but also outright win this election. So thank you guys so much for watching. I know this was a very long, slow video. Thank you guys for sticking it out. And as always, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and comment down in the suggestions below. With anything you may be concerned about or questions you may have, you can always put that down in the comments and I will do my best to address them in another video or mention them in the video itself. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.